Greetings to the members and viewers of the podcast and editorials of USA Citizens Network Group, a small group out of Pennsylvania that has been dedicated to providing a means for people with solid credentials in given subject areas to speak and to spread what they have to say to others in a way that major media sources are not, for whatever reason. And USA Citizens Network has been dedicated in that regard to election integrity, to medical independence of the doctors, to educational reform. And today we're going to be going in the second of what we believe will be 4 podcasts providing information about a very vital organization in our neighboring country of Canada, with the idea of learning from that organization and its leader as to what we should be aware of, what we should potentially we can do, and the like. My name is Bob Rust. I'm an attorney and a member of USA Citizen Network, and it's my pleasure to be able to interview people like our guest today, Alexander Schadenberg, who is the head of Euthanasia Prevention Coalition in Canada. He's been at it full-time since 1999. He is a very knowledgeable person. And when I asked him in our first interview what we could do to help him, his immediate response was, "You can help me by spreading the message of what we have learned and done in Canada to those in the United States, so they don't get caught up in the same way we got caught up." He, in our first interview, did review how the legislation for euthanasia got into place in Canada, how it snuck in a back door, so to speak, with pretty much a lie as to its intended use, and the fact that it went well beyond that so-called narrow explanation. It's something much bigger. I'm pretty confident that because of his work and his organization, there's been a hiatus as an agreement to have a discussion as to definitions of terms, which obviously, when you get into areas like this, is very, very critical. And today we want to build upon what Alex gave us in our first interview, and with other examples that he may have, maybe not confined just to Canada, but examples of what can happen with this kind of thing makes its entry into a society and grows like a cancer. So with that explanation, I'm going to turn it over to our esteemed guest, Alex Schadenberg. Anything you want to add about your background and past that there are going to be some people that did not hear our first interview, so you may want just to give them some idea of how you got involved with this, and whatever else you, in the way of the background of the organization, and then take it from there, sir.
Well, I've been involved with this work for a very long time. I started in the 90s, and so I'm older than I look, actually, but that's fine. It's actually a good thing, maybe. But anyway, it started in Canada by legalizing euthanasia in 2016, where they said it would be for terminally ill people only. And they also had certain definitions around how they would limit it, but they never actually defined those terms. So that's what I was saying in the first show, that one of the reasons this whole killing has gone crazy in Canada is not only because we legalized it, but we legalized it without definitions, which of course led to massive expansion. But you know, you have something very similar in the US, because you have assisted suicide now legal in 13 states. So last year, assisted suicide was passed in California. Sorry, not in California. That was already 2016. Sorry, in New York, Delaware, and in Illinois. So those are the three new states that legalize assisted suicide in 2025. So that brought the U.S. to 13 states. And a lot of people would say, well, Alex, that's not euthanasia, that's assisted suicide. But because of the language, they sometimes get confused as to what this is really all about. And I tell people, well, really, it is the same thing, just a different way of doing it. So let's get back to what we're all about here. I'm opposed to killing people, and that's the primary reason I got involved with opposing euthanasia and assisted suicide. Also, I have a son who is autistic, so we got involved with the disability community, and I clearly recognize the different attitude in the culture towards people with disabilities than existed towards, of course, able-bodied people, etc. That same negative attitude actually also applies to people who are very elderly and people who have significant health problems. And, people find themselves in those situations. I'm just going to tell a very quick story just to bring it home exactly how bad it is. And of course, this is a Canadian story again, but I don't think it's very much different than the U.S., other than we do have universal health care in Canada. I got a call last week from a woman in a city in the northern part of Ontario, and she was talking about her friend who she is the power of attorney for, meaning she has the one who makes the medical decisions, the financial decisions for this person, etc. Anyway, this woman has hydrocephaly, so she has got a bit of water on her brain. She might have had that all of her life, but in her older years now that's affecting her. And the doctors are refusing to put her in a shunt to drain that fluid because they say she's too old. She's 74. 74 is not very old today. Nonetheless, it's all ridiculous if you start putting it together about the discrimination against her. Now, this is what happened. The doctor said to the family, she's dying. Well, 3 months later, she's fully alive. She's fine. She eats. She's in the hospital. She eats fine. There's no issues. She does have some headaches. She does have memory issues, but they have not drained the fluid from her brain. She could live who knows how long this way. Yes, there will be a degeneration, but this is all about discriminating against her because she's 74 years old. And as you know, 74 is not the same thing as maybe how we viewed 74 50 years ago. It's just not the same thing at all. But this is the kind of thing that goes on. So getting back to it. So we have euthanasia in Canada, and it's been applied very, very widely. We now have 5% of all deaths that are euthanasia in Canada. And we've expanded this to include people with mental illnesses. There's certainly a lot of people with poverty, etc., people who have disabilities. So what happened in 2020 is 2021 is we expanded the law further by removing that terminal illness requirement. So now I'm going to go back to the U.S. You have 13 states that have legalized assisted suicide. The first state that actually put their law into place was in the state of Oregon, and that was in 1998. Since then, the Oregon assisted suicide law has just massively expanded. But what people don't understand is assisted suicide is nearly the same as euthanasia. So with euthanasia, they would lethally inject you with a lethal poison cocktail to cause your death, to kill you. So how we legalize euthanasia in Canada is we created an exception to homicide in the criminal code, an exception to murder. So if there's 2 signatures on your application by either 2 doctors or 2 nurse practitioners in Canada, they can go ahead and kill you. They have every legal right to do so. And on top of it, there's no way you could ever prosecute them in Canada if they do something which is considered really egregious, meaning that did not fit the intent of the law, even though, I'm getting to. Well, it's not very much different. So in Oregon, where they have assisted suicide, and California and Washington State and all these states where they have assisted suicide, they use this very similar drug concoction. So then the doctor prescribes the lethal powder that is to be mixed with a drink so someone would then consume it. The doctor is saying that, yes, your life is not worth living, and then they prescribe this lethal powder. That lethal powder is nearly identical to the concoction used in Canada. So the difference is not in the drug use or the drugs that they're doing. Then what would happen is the person would then receive that prescription. They would then mix it with their favorite drink. Why I say their favorite drink? It's a horrific thing to drink down. It's awful. It's the most disgusting thing to drink. And yet, of course, they're doing this in order to have their life ended. So the doctor prescribes that, and then what happens is they take it. So the only difference in this is the fact that with euthanasia, the doctor does the act. With assisted suicide, the doctor prescribes it, but you have to do the act. That's the difference. And people have to understand that they're really two birds of a feather. They are a little different, but they are the same. Now, part of the problem here is it's sold to the culture as to eliminate suffering. So it's all about suffering, suffering, suffering. I always say to people that the assisted suicide lobby has 3 talking points. It is suffering, suffering, and suffering. And then they'll throw in autonomy just to make you feel good. But of course, it's not about autonomy, and it's rarely about suffering. I'm not saying nobody suffers. Like, I'm not going to make that statement. But I will make the statement that if you look at the data, that is like when you look at the top reasons why people ask for assisted suicide in America, physical suffering, pain, fear of pain, it's way down on the list. You know, the top 5 reasons for assisted suicide are all about I can't do what the things I used to be able to do. The other thing they would say, I feel I'm a burden on people. I feel like a burden on people. They also would say that they have lost their ability to do things. These are the top reasons that they say why they've asked for assisted suicide and why they've died by assisted suicide, but suffering is way down on the list. So in fact, as much as I'm not saying it doesn't exist, it is not the primary reason, but that's what they sell it as. They sell it to the culture that way. My response to obviously people going through a terrible time is as a culture, it's really incumbent upon us to care for these people. You don't kill people. And if they are suffering, if that is the reality, we can actually deal with that suffering. We can actually care for people's pain and their symptoms. And minimally speaking, you would think in a just society, we would do that. Pain and suffering would be something we would care for. But in fact, you know, people who are dead, they don't have pain and suffering because they're dead, and we don't have to worry about them. So when we look at this, they say, but really, Alex, it's about my choice. It's about my body, my choice. I don't know, Bob, if you've heard that term before, my body, my
I
choice.
have. Mm-hmm.
And they say it's all about autonomy. Well, I believe in freedom and autonomy. Absolutely, I believe in freedom and autonomy. But assisted suicide is not about freedom, and it's not about autonomy. What the law actually does is it gives the doctor the right in law to be directly involved with killing you. That's what it does. The law is then designed to give total legal anonymity to the doctor who's directly involved with causing your death. That's how the law is worded. So in the U.S., how the laws are all written, they're based on a good faith principle. So when you read it, you say it has the how would you say, the quote quote safeguards that were designed in the law, and those safeguards are all being torn out. They're being replaced with nothing. I'll get into that in a second. But on top of it, what it does is it says the doctor who causes your death, that they're legally, they only have to worry about that they did so in good faith. Now, what's important about that statement is it's impossible to prove that they didn't do so in good faith. You can't prove that they didn't do so in good faith. Now, Canada, it's actually a step worse, but it's the same end. In Canada, it says that the doctor only has to be of the opinion you fit the criteria of the law. So here in Canada, they've given doctors the right to lethally inject you, and they only have to be of the opinion that you fit the criteria of the law. So if they were to kill somebody who clearly was not terminally ill, who might have had some disabilities, but clearly was not going through much of a difficult time, and the family's all upset, you can't prosecute that doctor because, as the doctor would say, I was of the opinion. And in the U.S., it's exactly the same thing. The doctor would say, I did so in good faith. I did so in good faith. So this is the kind of situation you have. Now, in the U.S., you also have this whole other problem. There's no oversight of the law. Now, what am I saying? When you look at the assisted suicide laws, every year, for instance, in the state of Oregon, they come out with a report. And it shows you the number of assisted suicide deaths that were reported. So, for instance, in 2024, you see in the report that there was about, I don't have the numbers in front of me, so it was about 370 reported assisted suicide deaths. in 2024. It might have been 367. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but it's not in front of my face, and I should have had it here as a notes. But anyway, but then it shows you another number, and it says that the Department of Health that is acknowledging that there was about 170 people who were approved for assisted suicide, who received lethal poison, and they have no idea what happened to them. And it's in every single report. You look at the report from 2024, the 2023 report, the 2022 report, and you see every year that number of they don't know what happened to them. They have no idea what happened to them. That number goes up every year. As the numbers of deaths go up, so does that number go up. So the question is you mean you're telling me you're giving people lethal poison, but there's no oversight of the law? So you start thinking about this, and you start realizing that this is really about killing. That's what this is about. This is about killing people. And so the other thing, they say, oh, well, you have to be terminally ill, Alex. So I think you're just going off a bit. They have to be terminally ill. So in the U.S., all the states have this 6-month definition issue. You have to be 6 months from death. You have to have the doctor has to state that it's the reasonable prognosis is 6 months. Well, what does 6 months mean? You might say, oh, well, they're dying, Alex, so why are you worrying about them? They're dying. Well, 6 months doesn't mean that you're actually dying in 6 months. What it means is that if you decide not to receive any medical treatment, then you may have a 6-month prognosis. So, who would have a 6-month prognosis if they decide not to receive treatment? A diabetic, for instance? Diabetics qualify for assisted suicide in America, even if they're fully treatable. So if someone is a type 1 diabetic and they decide not to take insulin any longer, for whatever reason, they immediately become qualified under the assisted suicide laws in the 13 different states in America where it's legal. This is the kind of thing that people just don't realize. It's not about you being terminally ill. It is about you seeking death and them providing you death. It's about causing death to people in a difficult situation. And it's done by poisoning the body. So we're going to go one step further. You would say, well, it can't be that bad, Alex. There can't be that many situations that it's problematic. Well, let's look at this further. Most U.S. states originally had the Oregon model of assisted suicide, which also has changed. What that model said is you had to have a 14-day waiting period. So if the doctor said, yes, you have a 6-month prognosis, I'm going to approve your assisted suicide. I think you're of right mind. That's the other thing. They had to agree that they thought you were of a right mind. Then they could prescribe the assisted suicide drugs. The original law said there was a 14-day waiting period. Now, most states have actually now waived that 14-day waiting period. So in fact, if they determine that you are within 6 months of death, they can give you a same-day death. Now, not every state has gone that far yet, but most of them have gone that far. The other thing about it is further to it, when you're defining these things, definitions are everything. There's no clear definition for terminal condition in these laws. Okay, it says 6-month prognosis. What does that mean? Well, these things are being reinterpreted now as chronic conditions. Now, what am I getting to? The other thing that's happening is they're redefining the meaning of terminal illness. So even in Oregon, where they have that 6-month prognosis definition within the law, it's not really spelled out. So what I mean is that I already said that if somebody decides that they are not going to accept treatment, obviously they would then fall quicker within that 6-month prognosis. And even if they are diabetic and they decide not to take insulin anymore, they could die by assisted suicide. But it's gone further now with the issue of eating disorders. So we see in the U.S. that there was a doctor in Colorado who began this whole direction of assisted suicide for people who have, bulimia, or people who have, different eating disorders. And this doctor in Colorado defined eating disorders as being a type of a terminal condition. So she argued that people with eating disorders can be defined as having a terminal condition, and she started doing assisted suicide on people with different eating disorders. Now, this is a serious thing because the eating disorders have always been known as chronic and not terminal conditions. And of course, the treatment for an eating disorder And I know that might be difficult for someone with their mental health issues and they've stopped eating and they have mental health issues and it's becoming very hard for them even to think about eating. I understand how this illness works for so many people, but nonetheless, the point of it is that it has a very simple treatment, and that is eating. You eat, you will
Right.
survive. If you don't eat, you will die. But anyway, so there's been assisted suicide going on. We've seen that in Oregon. We've seen that in Colorado and several other states where these eating disorders were listed as reasons for assisted suicide. In fact, in the 2024 assisted suicide report, the 2024, yeah, it was the 2024 assisted suicide report in Colorado that listed 18 cases of assisted suicide for eating disorders. The other thing that's gone on is the dropping of the residency requirement in the U.S. So the fact is you've gotten this massive explosion of assisted suicide deaths because states like Oregon and Vermont and um, and uh, and New Mexico have dropped their residency requirements. So people are then going to those states to die by assisted suicide. So for instance, in New Mexico, if you lived in Texas, you might live not so far from New Mexico, and people are going to New Mexico and dying by assisted suicide. In the same way with Oregon, there's actually now an assisted suicide clinic in Oregon that focuses on people who are out-of-state residents asking for assisted suicide. The final thing I'm going to throw in just to show you how things have gone is they're doing now assessments by telehealth. So that means people all over America would contact the doctor and they would do an interview just like this, never meet the doctor, just do an interview like this, and the doctor would then approve them for assisted suicide. And this is the kind of thing also going on, this whole thing about assessments by telehealth. So you're seeing this massive expansion of assisted suicide in America. The only difference between assisted suicide and euthanasia is the fact that with euthanasia, the doctor does the act. With assisted suicide, the doctor provides the means, the lethal powder, but the person has to take it themselves. Now, one other thing. Who's at the death? It's an important thing. The assisted suicide lobby is almost always at the death. So how assisted suicide works is it's not about an act of someone who decides on Friday morning, I've got my lethal powders, I'm going to mix it with my favorite drink and take it. No, that is almost never the case. It's not about, they say, oh, this is my autonomous act, I can do this to myself. That's almost never the case. It's almost always a planned death where the assisted suicide lobby friends, they come and they visit you and they then mix this for you and they make sure that you drink it all down, so they'll make sure you continue drinking. They'll urge you, and if you have any resistance they might urge you further to take it all. And this is the kind of thing, it's all part of their scheme to have more deaths. They're even throwing parties now. So what happens is, let's say someone asks for assisted suicide, they got approved for assisted suicide, but now it's like, 2 months later and they're still alive. They decided they don't want to take the drug. They don't want to take the poison. They're okay. They've been living pretty good. So what they'll do is the assisted suicide lobby will call them up and say, oh, I guess you're still around. Well, why don't we arrange a party? So then they'll have a party and they'll say, you can give us a list of your friends. What are your favorite foods and your favorite drinks and your favorite music? And they'll invite everyone to come together and they'll play the favorite drinks, the favorite music, serve the favorite drinks and food, and at the end of the night you die by assisted suicide, the assisted suicide party. This is about coercion then, isn't it? It's about
Well,
the
let me
promotion of killing.
Alex, okay, all very telling things, but a couple of things come to mind. You're listening to, the people listening to you, I'm sure, very intelligent people who really care. And we can get a little bit into the rationale on the other side for assisted living. But you mentioned the numbers you mentioned in Oregon, the numbers you mentioned in Colorado are not massive. 300 to 100 to 500 on an annual basis in Oregon. I don't know what it was in Colorado. One of the things that may be happening with some of our listeners and saying, "No, wait a minute, this sounds like it is what was intended." That is, I, as an individual, elect that I want to do this, and I take advantage of Oregon's law, and I go there to do it. And there are going to be a number of individuals saying, "Hey, that's okay. Where we draw the line is where somebody else is making the decision for us. I want to get into that in just a minute. But let me go back to your numbers and see what would you say to someone who said,
Well, first of all, Oregon's not a massive state.
okay,
So when we're talking numbers like that, they're actually, I'm pointing out that the numbers are actually likely much higher than they're actually reporting because
okay,
there's a significant number that the person died but no report was sent in. So when
okay,
that happens, we don't know if they died by assisted suicide or they died a natural death. We don't know, and there's no follow-up. So the Oregon Department of Health says right in their report, we have no report. We have a death certificate. We have no report. We don't know. We know they were approved. We know they received the lethal drugs, but we don't know how they died. So this is a whole other thing, this whole oversight, how many other deaths are going on. The fact of it is that if you look at, for instance, California and places like that, you get this disparaging number because you get like there was in 2023 about 1,500 prescriptions written, but there was about 1,000 deaths, and then they also had this number in the middle there of about it was somewhere around 300 or so deaths where they had no idea what happened to them. They don't know. So you get this whole situation. I'm opposed to assisted suicide because I'm opposed to killing people, and I'm opposed to doctors being directly involved with killing people. And so even if you were to say, oh, well, the law is working as it's supposed to work, you would assume if someone agreed with this, that they would also say, but it's important to have oversight of it. It's important to know what's actually going on. It's important to know if these people actually died by assisted suicide or not. And it's really important to know what the reasons were for this. And we don't really have all that data because they don't really follow up on it. But I'm going to go one step further. What happens to a culture that gets involved with killing? And I think this is the most telling thing of all. I'm opposed to killing because I recognize, I'm opposed to killing people. That's just my basic faith principle, my human principle. You can feel pretty safe around me, Bob. If I get mad at you, I'm not going to kill
well,
you. It's not going to happen for any reason. But on top of it, I recognize that every human being has a sanctity. Or that there's a special nature to being human. And I don't go around killing those humans, these people. I don't go around killing other people, nor should our doctors do so. Making your doctors into killers is a very serious problem. So this is where we go. I will say to you, though, that the problem with assisted suicide is people say, oh, well, that's very different from euthanasia. And I'm saying, well, no, it's actually quite similar. It's almost the same. But the assisted suicide lobby looks at assisted suicide as the stepping stone. So in the U.S., they tried to get euthanasia legalized, and they failed. More recently, even they tried in California again. So California legalized assisted suicide in 2016. The assisted suicide lobby launched a court case by this Dr. Shavelson. He was trying to extend the law to include euthanasia, where Shavelson would then kill you rather than you dying by the lethal powders. And he was arguing that this was the more compassionate thing to do because it's easier for a doctor to kill you than for you to be involved with drinking down that lethal dose yourself. And he failed at it. The courts disagreed with him. Nonetheless, that's what they want. And when I say to you the difference is so minor, eventually we will get there. And as long as you allow killing, it doesn't make sense not to allow it to be done by somebody else, because the whole basic idea of it is it's easier for someone else to kill you than for you to take the lethal dose yourself. It's
let
much
me
easier.
let me jump in again. I beg your pardon, but okay, I hear you loud and clear. But I also hear people saying, hey, I want the right to be able to make my own decision. Now, let me make a quick point of my own. We talked a little bit about this in our first discussion. We went through a eugenics movement in this country in
Yep.
last century, early century. And
Yep.
we almost, finally, there was a backlash and it stopped. But the rationale was that this was a humane thing. We were people that who couldn't were living in poverty or living with illness, who were disabled, that their life wasn't worth living.
Correct.
And out of that eugenics movement evolved what happened in Germany with Hitler. But let me just go to this thing. One of the things that I and our organization, I said we are for medical independence. One of the things that we've dealt with has been the hospital systems now being run by administrators as opposed to doctors. And they're making decisions like if you're a certain age, it's not worthwhile you
Right.
having,
Like if you're 74,
well,
yeah.
you having this particular kind of surgery or this particular kind of thing. That is, again, a foot in the door, an idea of how, right, what this is really happening in our country right now. If it gets carried forth, and as it did at the beginning of the last century, into academia, into the government, into the scientific community, people coming about in favor of it mainly because they're getting paid to do so,
Yep.
being consultants. That typically is what happens. Then I think I see a connection between what you're saying right now. Okay, 500
Right.
in Oregon.
So the
Where's
euthanasia
it going?
lobby did grow out of the whole eugenics movement.
Hmm.
So when you're talking about the Euthanasia Society of America, which was quite growing and successful in the 1930s, it
Right,
actually directly led to what happened in Germany.
right,
And people don't realize the interconnections, the communications between, the German philosophy of certain lives not worth living and how that actually grew out of America. And of course, Canada, the same thing. We were all sort of together on this. So you had this whole eugenics movement, the idea that certain lives are not worth living. And
right,
from that came the euthanasia movement. Now, in America, the only reason they legalized assisted suicide and not euthanasia was because they couldn't convince Americans to allow exceptions to homicide like we have in Canada.
right,
But, as I say, it's very similar. Now, why is this still a form of eugenics? Well, assisted suicide is equally a form of eugenics because they're saying to you, yes, I agree your life's not worth living, but in fact, your life's so much not worth living that I'm going to prescribe to you a lethal poison. Now remember, this is not the same, and I don't think there's anything ever good about suicide. I think suicide is always a tragedy. Nonetheless, this is not the same as someone jumping off the Golden
right,
Gate Bridge,
right,
as terrible as that could be. What this is somebody else directly involved. So what you're actually doing in law when you legalize assisted suicide is you're giving the power to your doctors or medical professionals to be involved with killing you. And that's where you should never go. You should never
right,
go there. You should never give somebody else the right and law to be involved with killing you. You should never do that. And this is where it becomes down to this whole eugenic thing. And in the previous show, we also talked about how we've had this problem in Canada where people with disabilities who are living in poverty or people with disabilities who are homeless are dying by euthanasia. And I mentioned several different stories about that. Well, the fact of it is that they qualify to be killed under the law, and they're going through a difficult time. And they call this freedom, choice, and autonomy, but really it's about abandoning them.
right.
We're abandoning them to death.
Did
So
I hear
I
you?
do agree that this is a eugenic thing, and I argue that it's a eugenic thing. And in the Euthanasia Society of America, which was around, that came out of the eugenics movement,
Right,
it only failed because at the end of World War II, the concept of euthanasia was too unpopular because of what Hitler did.
right. And that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. We could have gone much, much further. We're getting close to when we need to wrap on this session, but to understand that you also have the story about a younger woman who uh, was put to death and then her organs were harvested. Did I misunderstand that? Did you? Are you still with me, Alex? Alex, you there?
No, the case in Spain that last week,
Oh,
this young 25-year-old woman so what had happened is she had attempted a suicide and survived the suicide. So in
okay,
2022, she sought out euthanasia. So Spain legalized euthanasia in 2021. She was seeking euthanasia. Her dad then intervened in the courts to prevent that death. She just died by euthanasia. So what happened is that it went through the courts, and the courts did say that she qualified. But here's the thing: this was a woman who had serious mental health issues, serious mental illness. She attempted her suicide. She was going through suicidal ideation. She wanted to die, but based on the fact of her paralysis, she was approved for euthanasia. I consider that eugenic right off the bat. We're going to
right,
kill you because of your paralysis. We agreed that, yeah, you're good to be killed. But on top of it, she agreed to be an organ donor. So in the end, you had the secondary pressure that she had to go forward. They had scheduled her death for this time and this day, and her organs were going to be prepared, and they had it all lined up that, person A was going to get this kidney, person B was going to get the liver, this person was going to get the heart, this person was going to get this, that, and the other thing. And so she in the end was told, you, because they interviewed her by the media the day before, and she was sort of hemming and hawing a bit. But of course, she was then told, well, you have to go through with this. You've been approved for this. We're all set up for all these organ donations. You have to go through with this. Now, I don't have a problem with the concept of organ donation itself. If you're dead, that is. If you're dead, giving your
Right.
organs is not a problem to me. Now, the question is, are you actually dead when you give your organs? And if we look at the ethical changes, I would not sign an organ donor card. But in this case, it was directly connected to killing her to get her organs. And there's a whole other ethical question there now. It's a very different ethical question.
Okay. Listen, we're going to need to wind down in this session. I'm reticent to do so because this is also very important.
Well,
Let me say that one of the things that uh, people that are watching and listening to you are seeing how to reach your organization, and it is my hope that we through social media are going to get your message out, and there are going to be people that want to replicate what you're doing in Canada. Uh, would you speak to them, those that might be
yes.
saying, "Hey, how do I do something about this?"
Absolutely. The most important way to prevent assisted suicide or euthanasia from becoming legal is to be organized already, to start in your own communities, to work with us and to do that. And we would provide any resources you want. It's exactly why we exist, to get others involved in the issue. The other thing with that is if you're in a state where it is legal, the best way to prevent assisted suicide is to explain to people that we're opposed to killing people, that this is absolutely wrong, that this is the wrong idea. Sometimes the voice speaking up seems like you're in a lonely desert, but by speaking up, you end up making a big difference. So we have to be willing to speak up. Our silence is not our friend. So getting organized and to have that message in our churches, in our communities, in the wider public does make a difference, and people do change their mind because somebody was willing to say to them, it's not necessary for you to be killed. You can
Okay.
be properly cared for. Let's not go there. I'm willing to help you.